Multi-club football ownership. I've kind of touched on this very briefly in a couple of videos recently, and most of the time it's followed up by me saying that it's not something I really want to talk about or get into because it's something I'll talk about for ages, and the video that I'm talking about it in will then just be totally derailed with me going off on a tangent as it relates to this topic. So I thought today I'd dedicate a video towards multi-club football ownership. Got some notes down here in front of me, so if you see me looking down a few times, it will be because I want to make sure where I'm at with this video so that I can make some informative points, give a couple of opinions of my own, and also potentially how it can be dealt with going forward. First of all, I just want to give a little bit of a background to this topic. Multi-club football ownership is something that really kind of made headlines, let's call it, when Red Bull about 15, 20 years ago or so were owning RB Leipzig and also Red Bull Salzburg, right? It's not Red Bull Leipzig because of some of the naming laws that you can have for football club names in Germany. Although I think because Bayer Leverkusen existed prior to that law change, they were allowed to keep the name because Bayer, obviously the company. But anyway, don't want to get off track. But RB Leipzig, Rasenball Sport, whatever they're called, Leipzig and Red Bull Salzburg was kind of the initial thing, and it was seen, especially within German football culture, this was seen as really quite destructive, and that they were just coming in and making a lot of noise and doing a bunch of stuff, and had some success too. Have made Champions League football a couple of times, taken away top talents from other teams as well. And obviously, it was their way of trying to divert that 50+1 rule that they have in German football with regards to ownership. So that's where it really kind of made a splash and we became aware of it. So it's still, relatively speaking, quite a new thing. City Football Group, over the last decade plus, they now have 10 plus clubs in their mantle, not just in England, but in North America, Oceania, Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, all over the shop, right? City Football Group are a major player in multi-club ownership. A lot of the time, though, that was kind of seen as okay because there are no teams really that they own that you would say are going to be in any sort of direct competition, be that domestically or in Europe, against Manchester City. So you'd say, okay, it was kind of fine. I understand it, diversifying your portfolio, whatever. I believe the guy's name is John. Yep, John Textor is an American businessman, co-owner, part owner of Crystal Palace, but also owns Lyon and also owns two other teams as well. Just again, I'm trying to create a bit of a picture here as how things develop and start to snowball, right? The Qataris, they own Paris Saint-Germain, they own Braga, I believe a couple of other teams as well, and most notably, they seem to be the front runners for buying Manchester United. Now, with a lot of these other teams that I've talked about here, if Manchester City own a team, but then they own a team in Australia, it's no big deal, right? If Red Bull own a team, Leipzig, and then they also own a team, Salzburg, like realistically, what are the chances all that often that they're going to be playing each other? They're not going to face each other in domestic competitions, be that League Cups or domestic league football itself. And they're probably, maybe, but probably not facing each other in European football as well. The chances would be kind of crazy. We get to a point here, especially with Manchester United potentially and PSG, we're talking about two teams who quite easily could face each other in European competitions, be that in the group stages or the knockouts. And I'm not just saying the Champions League, both those teams I'm sure are more than capable of maybe playing in the Europa League at some point, right? If a bad campaign goes a certain way. We then move on to Saudi Arabia and the private investment fund and all these teams, Al Nasser, Al Hilal, who are all owned by the Saudi-backed state, but then they also own a team like Newcastle United, and they also have major investments within a team like Chelsea. And we see Koulibaly, Edouard Mendy, N'Golo Conte, I know that was separate, but all these kinds of players moving within these kinds of teams. And we stop and we go, what's going on here? What I will say is I don't personally have anything wrong whatsoever with somebody taking advantage of the rules as they are. That's not the fault of the person taking advantage of the rules. Now, you and I, watching the video, we could privately maybe speak to one another and go, it's not really a great move. I don't like you for making a move of that nature. You're kind of coming across like you're trying to mess everybody over because you're using a bit of a loophole. But generally speaking, legally speaking too, go for it. If you're finding a flaw within the rules and the setup as we are, great, exploit it as much as you can until it changes. right? It's all about trying to get the advantage in a very, very competitive industry. So I totally understand that. Let's get on to some pros, because I don't want this just to be me harping on and being super negative about it. There's such a thing as portfolio diversification. Again, to use these kind of phrases and sayings, if you put all your eggs into one basket and you drop the basket, all the eggs break, right? If you have all your money in one team and that team gets relegated or doesn't do well or does something illegal or wrong or whatnot, that team can be in real trouble. Whereas if you diversify, your chances of every team failing is not going to work. You increase the chances of maybe multiple teams doing well and your risk becomes less. That's a huge pro. And for investors within an industry that we have here with private investment within football clubs, I go ahead, fine. I have no problem with that pro as a thing. And I would be, if it were my money, I'd probably do the same thing. There's a scouting benefit. There's a global relationship benefit here. If you have a presence in South America, in North America, in Africa, in Asia, in Oceania, in Europe, right? You're building relationships with local communities, bit of brand identity as well. You're learning things all the time. Your scouting department, you can feed information from club to club about a certain area, about a certain player, about a contract situation, right? Release clauses, all sorts of good stuff, right? If each club that you have has a successful academy, that blend of knowledge can just benefit you immensely. So from a scouting point of view and a global relationship point of view, I love it. Sponsorship. If you're the owner, if you're a City Football Group and you can say to people, hey, listen, we've got a preseason tour coming up for all of our teams. And what we can do is when we're doing the player interviews at the end of the game, we can have your logo at the back there. We can have some of our players take part in an advert for your product. We can do all this kind of stuff. Why not? Why not? I'm not going to be here and tell people that we should cap putting an amount of money that people can earn from other sponsorship deals. The game needs money, right? The game needs money. It has a lot, but again, this is a free market economy in which we're working in, and it should be able to earn what it deserves. Okay. We've done a bit of a background and we've done some pros. So let's get through to some of the facts of the matter, and then I'll address some of my concerns. Per the CIES Football Observatory, as of 2022, multi-club ownership from clubs globally stands at 195 different football clubs are involved in some way of multi-club ownership. What I don't like initially is the idea that you can skirt around the financial rulings. You can have a player which realistically you could check Transfermarkt, you could check anywhere in the world that does player valuations. You could ask me and James what we think. You could have a player who, let's say, is worth 10 million euros as per Transfermarkt, as per just general opinion amongst professionals as it relates to a player value. If your club is lacking in terms of player sales, but you have a club that has room within the financial regulations to buy players, you could choose to sign that player freely for whatever you want. This 10 million value player, which you would say 10 million is a fair market rate. 15 is overpaying, 5 is underpaying. Anything above 15 is 50% above that market rate you'd say is crazy. You could easily sign that player for 40 million euros and just move it to another one of your teams, no problem. Then your prized asset can then operate more freely like it would want to do. This is the issue we're having at the moment with Chelsea. Now, supposedly it's been dealt with, concerns have been made, and those have now been levelled. But selling all these players to these Saudi Arabian teams when their Saudi Arabian investment in Chelsea does seem kind of dodgy, especially with an aging player like Koulibaly, the money he's going for, the wages that will jump off, and what this allows Chelsea to then potentially do in terms of flexibility and freedom as it relates to their money situation. In Saudi Arabia, it's a Saudi-owned league. They can kind of decide what they want to do financially. And the other thing, guys, it's their money. They're just moving their money to a different thing. That, I would argue, is an unfair advantage. Not every team can do that. Going back to my original point, though, they should absolutely be allowed to do it if it's within the laws that they're allowed to do. The point being, we need to create the laws. We need to create the setup and the regulation. I know Gary Neville is a huge proponent of independent regulation. And to a certain extent, I agree with him. But I think that independent regulators can be got at too. There can be Rolexes exchanged in dark alleyways or in fancy restaurants across the world that will allow certain things to go by. There needs to be something a little firmer, something a little across the line that prevents this kind of thing from happening. But this is a major, major issue. Ruben Neves, who is one of the better central midfielders in world football, and once he left, I believe it was Porto, was I want to say like the youngest captain Wolves have ever had, and all this kind of stuff has been a real pillar of Wolves since they've come into the Premier League and stayed there. Has really increased the quality, and I think by all guesses and estimations, you thought this would be a guy playing for Barcelona one day, playing for Real Madrid, playing for Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester United, Paris Saint-Germain, Juventus, except Bayern Munich, etc., etc. He's chosen at this point in his career to go to Saudi Arabia. Now, that may just be his choice. Maybe he likes it out there. Maybe he likes the money that he's probably going to be paid. I would say that's true. But the latest rumours are that he may now be on loan to Newcastle United. Just seems a little dodgy to me. I don't know about you guys, but I don't love the way that that looks. I don't like the optics of that. We'll go on to another, I would argue, slightly more serious part of it as well. As much as the transfer regulation and moving money around and how dodgy that is, and teams taking advantage of their situation in that respect, and it damaging other teams as well, I do want to make the point to you of potentially in the future, if the Qataris win the bid for Manchester United and have all this money to spend, and they still own Paris Saint-Germain, are we saying that it's incredibly unlikely that in a big semi-final, or God forbid, even in a final, Manchester United versus Paris Saint-Germain is a match? The owners would decide who wins that football match that will benefit their bank accounts the most. Is it better for them if Manchester United win a Champions League final, or is it better if Paris Saint-Germain win that as well? Now, Gary Neville interviewed Alexander Ceferin as per the overlap, which, again, I'm assuming if you're watching me, you're probably well aware of the overlap and you probably watch it or a subscriber, etc. But Gary Neville did sit down with Alexander Ceferin and do an interview about this and asked about third-party ownership. Alexander Ceferin is not an idiot. Alexander Ceferin is, I believe, an ex-criminal lawyer, has had one hell of an upbringing, is a hardy, not to be messed with kind of character. And Gary Neville simply asks the question about multi-club ownership and what we're going to do about it. And Ceferin's answer was, and again, don't quote me on this because I don't have it in front of me, maybe I should. His answer was, it's kind of an interesting conversation, isn't it? Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. You're the head of UEFA. You're the head of the biggest club competition in the world of sport. You, within the FIFA umbrella, you have the biggest strand of that umbrella in world football. The most eyeballs on a product, any sort of entertainment product in the world, is what you oversee. If this is not something that's at least been somewhat considered privately, then we have major, major problems. Major problems. Now, he's an ex-lawyer, so maybe he doesn't want to say something which he can then no longer back up going forward in the future, and I would understand that, fair enough, smarter man than me. But I would also say to not, at least in an interview, come across as knowledgeable on the subject and to just leave it at, it's something we're really thinking about hard, and we will get back to you shortly with a decision on how we're going to handle this and tackle this. He came across as it was kind of a brand new thing for him to be dealing with. I didn't love that. Finally, it steps up to a broader issue and a broader term. I said to you that 195 football clubs are now involved in some way in multi-club ownership within the world of football, as per the CIES Football Observatory. Please go check it out. Fantastic website, brilliant company. They do fantastic work. Is that number going to stay the same? Or is that number going to increase, or is that number going to decrease? Because if you look at historically how many clubs have been involved in this, it's not kind of going up and down and peaks and troughs, and we'll see there is a steady line of increase here, right? What does that mean going forward? Well, it means that by the end of 2023, we might be looking at 250 clubs. By the end of 2033, we might be looking at 1,000 plus clubs. The idea of a European Super League will happen naturally based on investment and multi-club ownership. A team will have their prized asset, their prized possession, right, which is probably going to be either a Premier League team or Real Madrid or Barcelona. Within that setup, They're going to own multiple other teams all around the world if this is let to just continue, and they're just going to feed in to that top team. There's then only one competition that we care about, and by virtue of us doing nothing about it, the European Super League already exists. Now, it's my opinion, and I've said this before, the most lucrative league, most watched league in the world, and the league that has the most eyes on it and most investment, most money into it is the Premier League. I believe the European Super League already exists, and it's the Premier League. These huge fees and stuff, it's not happening anywhere else in Europe. En masse, if you actually look at European spending as it relates to football, sometimes they're just making money because of the money coming from European football, and they're just selling their better players and just kind of keeping their head above water in the other European leagues. It's in leagues like the Premier League where you're constantly making a loss on transfers because obviously all you're trying to be is competitive, and the money that makes up for those losses in transfers comes from broadcasting rights, sponsorships, match day revenue, all this stuff that you would expect it to come across as. This is my hottest take, and this is the thing that I would easily get most criticism for and most people would hate me for. I am a believer in the European Super League because what it means is it breaks down the system that we already have. And if it's a success, the European Super League, then great. What's everyone complaining about? It'll be a success. If it's not a success and then we have to rebuild football somehow, hopefully we'll do it in a way where we consider these factors going forward. I just wanted to give a bit of background. I wanted to give some statistics and some information, some things that could happen, some things that couldn't happen, and just some things that I'm concerned about and worried about going forward within European football, because it's only going one way, you guys. And the only issue with something when it goes one way is just a matter of time until we get there. If there's an inevitable coming here and an inevitable happening, and it's something that we don't like the look of in the future, then we need to do something about it. And I don't see any problem with starting right now that we recognize there's a problem. This multi-club ownership thing has been bubbling away for a while. And just in terms of the competitive nature of sport comes into question, let alone financial doping that these other teams can clearly do. And that's not even getting into sports washing and the Saudi Arabias of the world, the Qatars of the world, getting involved in sports and golf and all this other stuff just to make them seem really great and really cool and everybody being okay with it. I can't tell you how much of my Twitter feed wants Qatari owners to be a part of Manchester United Football Club. How many people from Newcastle fans that I see on Twitter that are absolutely delighted in Saudi Arabia. Again, it's funny how quickly people can move from one to the other. And guys, I won't lie to you, if somebody with a questionable background comes in and purchases Roma off the Friedkins, and then Roma are winning Serie A and competitive in the Champions League and all this kind of stuff, I don't know where my morality sits with that kind of thing, because I'm going to see a team I love have success, which is ultimately what we want. Let's not forget that Manchester City have just won a treble after Sheikh Mansour took over however many years ago. Newcastle United are right on track behind them as well. They've just made Champions League football, signing the likes of Sandro Tonali, doing these kinds of deals and making these kinds of moves. They're right on track as well. Again, this sports washing thing, the reason why these states do it is because it works. I don't like that any more than you do, but it does work. Again, gone off on a bit of a tangent, just wanted to vent and get something off my chest. This video in particular, I know me and James say at the end of every video, comments. Newcastle fans, Manchester United fans, Manchester City fans, Paris Saint-Germain fans, RB Leipzig fans, Red Bull Salzburg fans, anybody as it relates to multi-club ownership. And also, if your team is not a part of multi-club ownership, but is worried about what it's going to do going forward, I do want to see comments. Make them long. I don't want to see just a quick, tell me, think about it. I hope you've digested what I've said today. Any questions you want to ask, anything like that, let's kind of open up a dialogue here a little bit. Drop a like on the video if you like what you've seen as well. Do hit that subscribe button as well if you are not already. And until next time, I'll see you later.